The millionaire's twin boys had scared off every nanny hired to care for them, until a quiet housekeeper from the Philippines did something no one expected. What she managed to do in one stormy night left even their powerful father in stunned silence. Secrets long buried began to unravel, and the lives inside that grand Charleston estate would never be the same again. This is a story of redemption, resilience, and the power of staying when everyone else walks away. Get ready. This journey will touch your heart. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from. The Charleston summer hung heavy in the air as Marisol de la Cruz stood at the wrought iron gates of the Mercer estate, clutching her worn canvas bag in one hand and a crumpled recommendation letter in the other. She gazed up at the imposing white-columned mansion that seemed to touch the clouds. Oak trees draped with Spanish moss lined the long driveway, their ancient branches offering silent judgment. "It's just another job," she whispered to herself, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. At 32, Marisol had spent the last decade caring for other people's children across 3 continents. Her resume was a patchwork of homes and families, each one teaching her something new about what it meant to build trust with young hearts. But this position was different. The Mercer twins had become infamous in Charleston's elite circles, 5-year-old boys who had driven away 14 professional nannies in less than 2 years. The intercom beside the gate crackled to life. "State your business." "Marisol de la Cruz. I have an appointment with Mrs. Brooks about the childcare position." A pause, then a mechanical click as the gates reluctantly parted. The gravel crunched beneath her sensible shoes as she made her way toward the house. The immaculate gardens seemed untouched by human hands, perfect in a way that felt sterile rather than inviting. No toys scattered the lawn. No laughter echoed across the property. The silence felt unnatural for a home with young children. The massive front door swung open before she could knock, revealing a tall, silver-haired woman with impeccable posture and eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Brooks?" Marisol extended her hand. "You're late." The woman didn't take her hand, but stepped aside to let her enter. "I expected you at 10 sharp. The bus was delayed, I apologize." Mrs. Brooks raised an eyebrow. "You came by bus?" "Yes, ma'am." The disapproval in that single syllable was deafening. The foyer opened into a space that seemed designed to intimidate. Marble floors that amplified every footstep, crystal chandeliers that cast prisms across the walls, and artwork that looked too valuable to be within a child's reach. It was a museum, not a home. "The twins are in the East Wing playroom. They've been told to expect you." Mrs. Brooks led the way through a maze of hallways. "Mr. Mercer is rarely home before 8. You'll be expected to handle the children's schedule independently. Meals are at 7, noon, and 6. Bedtime is 8 sharp, no exceptions." Marisol nodded, mentally cataloguing the information while taking in her surroundings. Family photos were noticeably absent from the walls. Instead, landscapes and abstract pieces filled the space, beautiful but emotionally distant. "What happened to their mother?" she asked quietly. Mrs. Brooks stopped abruptly, turning to face her with thinned lips. "Mrs. Mercer passed away during childbirth. That is not a topic for discussion in this house, is that clear?" "Yes, ma'am." They continued in silence until reaching a set of double doors. Muffled crashes could be heard from within. "The last nanny left yesterday. She lasted precisely 4 days." Mrs. Brooks straightened an already perfect lapel. "I'll return in 1 hour to see if you're still standing." With that, she opened the doors and gave Marisol a gentle push forward, before closing them firmly behind her. The playroom was in chaos. Toys were scattered everywhere, books had been pulled from shelves, and what appeared to be finger paint decorated one wall in angry red streaks. In the center of the hurricane stood 2 identical boys with dark curls and stormy eyes. "You must be Caleb and Carter," Marisol said calmly, setting down her bag. The boys exchanged a look that contained an entire silent conversation. One clutched a toy truck defensively, while the other crossed his arms. "Which one's which?" she asked. "Figure it out," said the one with the truck. Marisol smiled. "Fair enough." Instead of approaching them, she sat cross-legged on the floor and began unpacking her bag. First came a worn children's book, then a small wooden puzzle box, and, finally, a homemade cloth doll with mismatched button eyes. The twins watched suspiciously as she arranged the items beside her. "What's that?" the arms-crossed twin finally asked, pointing to the doll. "This is Capre." He's from the Philippines, where I grew up. He protects children from nightmares. That's baby stuff, Truck Twin scoffed, but he inched closer nonetheless. Maybe, Marisol shrugged. But everyone has bad dreams sometimes. Even grown-ups, arms crossed Twin asked. Especially grown-ups. A silence fell, but it was different from the oppressive quiet of the hallways. This silence held curiosity. I'm Carter, the one with the truck finally said. He's Caleb. It's nice to meet you both. Marisol didn't react to their surrender with triumph. She simply nodded as if they were having a normal conversation. I hear you've had a lot of people come and go. Caleb's expression darkened. They all leave anyway. The simple statement carried the weight of a much older soul. Marisol felt something shift in her chest, a familiar ache that came whenever she encountered children who had learned too early that people weren't permanent. Some people do leave, she acknowledged, but not everyone. Carter snorted. You will. Marisol opened the puzzle box, revealing intricate wooden pieces. Would you like to bet on that? For the first time, a flicker of interest crossed their identical faces. What kind of bet? Caleb asked cautiously. If I'm still here in 1 week, you have to help me make pancakes on Saturday morning. If I'm gone, you get this. She held up the puzzle box. It belonged to my grandfather. It's very special to me. The twins exchanged another of their silent communications. Deal, they said in unison, though neither moved to shake on it. Mrs. Brooks returned precisely 1 hour later to find Marisol sitting on the floor, the twins a careful distance away but engaged in building a tower with blocks. The room was still a disaster, but a tentative connection had formed, fragile as spider silk but present nonetheless. You're still here, Mrs. Brooks observed, genuine surprise in her voice. I am, Marisol replied simply. That evening, she was shown to a small bedroom in the staff wing. The space was impersonal but clean, with a narrow bed and a window overlooking the side garden. After unpacking her few belongings, she sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out a small notebook. Day 1. They are so angry, but it's not really anger. It's fear wearing a brave face. The house is beautiful but cold. No one talks about their mother. The space she left behind has become a fortress wall. Marisol closed the notebook and looked out at the massive oak tree visible from her window. Its branches reached toward the darkening sky like supplicating hands. I can be patient, she whispered to herself. I know how to wait for trust to grow. Outside, the first stars appeared above Charleston, indifferent to the small dramas unfolding beneath them. Inside the grand house, 2 little boys fell asleep clutching matching stuffed bears. Their backs pressed against each other for comfort no adult had been able to provide. And Marisol de la Cruz, the 15th nanny to cross the Mercer threshold, turned off her light and prepared for what would surely be the challenge of her career, not just caring for children who didn't want care, but somehow turning this beautiful, empty mansion into something that felt like home. Julian Mercer's arrival home was heralded by the subtle shift in the house's atmosphere. Staff stood straighter, voices lowered, and an almost imperceptible tension tightened the air. Marisol observed this transformation from the kitchen doorway, where she was preparing the twins' evening snack. The man who entered looked nothing like the smiling figure she had glimpsed in a lone photograph hidden in the boy's bedroom drawer. This Julian Mercer moved with the mechanical precision of someone going through motions rather than living them. His tailored suit couldn't disguise the weariness that hung from his shoulders, and the lines bracketing his mouth spoke of frowns more frequent than smiles. He was handsome in the distant way of magazine models, aesthetically pleasing but untouchable. Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Brooks greeted him at the door, taking his briefcase with practiced efficiency. The new childcare provider started today, Miss de la Cruz from the Philippines. His eyes flicked briefly in Marisol's direction, assessing and dismissing her in the same moment. How are the boys? They've been with her all day. No incidents reported. Something like surprise crossed his features before disappearing behind a neutral mask. Where are they now? In the garden. Miss de la Cruz was preparing their snack. Julian nodded once before heading toward his study, the conversation clearly over. No questions about his son's day, no interest in meeting the person responsible for their care. The invisible wall around him was almost tangible. Marisol returned to slicing apples into star shapes, processing what she had just witnessed. The distance between father and sons explained so much about the twins' behavior. When she brought the snack outside, she found Caleb and Carter huddled beneath the oak tree, heads bent together in serious conversation. They fell silent at her approach. "I saw your father arrive," she said, setting down the tray between them. Carter's expression shuttered. "So? So, nothing. Just an observation." She gestured to the food. "I made star apples and almond butter. My mum used to make these for me when I was your age." Caleb eyed the carefully cut fruit. "Our mum used to make heart sandwiches." It was the first time either boy had mentioned their mother voluntarily. Marisol kept her expression neutral, despite the significance. "Would you prefer hearts next time?" Caleb shrugged, but the gesture held less hostility than his previous interactions. "Maybe." They ate in companionable silence, the late afternoon sun dappling through oak leaves above them. In just one day, Marisol had learned that pushing the boys yielded resistance, while patient space often led to small openings. "Does your dad join you for dinner?" she asked casually. The twins exchanged one of their looks. "Sometimes," Carter answered, "when he's not busy." "Which is never," Caleb added with practiced indifference that couldn't quite mask the hurt beneath. Bedtime revealed another layer of the household's dysfunction. The twins' bedroom was beautiful but sterile, expensive furniture and educational toys arranged with precision rather than love. No drawings adorned the walls. No childhood mess was permitted to exist. As she helped them into pajamas, Marisol noticed a small wooden box tucked beneath Carter's pillow. "What's that?" she asked. Carter tensed. "Nothing. It's private," Caleb added defensively. Marisol nodded. "Everyone deserves privacy. I was just curious." After reading 3 stories, one more than they'd initially demanded, she tucked them in and turned on a small nightlight. But instead of leaving, she sat in the rocking chair beside their beds. "What are you doing?" Caleb asked suspiciously. "I'm going to sit here for a while, is that okay?" The boys frowned in unison. "Why?" Carter demanded. "Because new places can feel strange at bedtime, and because sometimes it's nice not to be alone." Neither boy responded, but neither objected either. Within 20 minutes, their breathing had deepened into sleep. Marisol remained, watching the small rises and falls of their chests, noting how in sleep they unconsciously reached for each other across the space between their beds. On her 3rd day, the twins tested her in earnest. They hid her shoes, accidentally spilled juice on her notebook, and refused to respond to any direct questions. By afternoon, they had escalated to barricading themselves in the playroom, shouting that they wanted her to leave. Instead of anger, Marisol felt clarity. This was the pattern: push away before being abandoned, hurt before being hurt. She sat outside the door and began to sing softly, a Filipino lullaby her grandmother had taught her. The foreign words floated through the wooden barrier between them. Eventually, the shouting stopped. When Mrs. Brooks appeared, clearly prepared to intervene, Marisol shook her head. "They need time," she said simply. An hour later, the door cracked open. 2 solemn faces peered out. "We're hungry," Carter announced, as if no conflict had occurred. "Let's make sandwiches," Marisol suggested. Heart-shaped ones. That night brought a thunderstorm that rattled windows and split the sky with jagged light. Marisol was barely surprised when her bedroom door creaked open around midnight, revealing 2 small figures silhouetted against the hallway light. "We can't sleep," Caleb said, a tremor in his voice betraying his fear. "The storm is too loud," Carter added. Marisol nodded and held out her hands. "Would you like to stay here until it passes?" By the 5th day, the twins had stopped actively trying to drive her away. Small victories accumulated. Carter allowed her to help with a difficult puzzle. Caleb showed her his collection of rocks hidden beneath the porch steps. Both boys actually laughed when she pretended to be a sea monster during bath time. But Julian Mercer remained a ghost in his own home, appearing briefly at breakfast or dinner, his interactions with his sons formal and awkward. Marisol observed him with growing concern, recognizing the signs of grief calcified into something harder and colder. The boys reflected his emotional absence in their play, creating elaborate scenarios where daddy figures were always away on important business, never present for the adventures. On her 7th night, the evening that would determine whether she had won their bet, another storm swept through. Charleston. This one brought winds that howled like wounded animals and rain that attacked the windows in angry sheets. Marisol had just finished her evening routine when thunder cracked directly overhead. and seconds later, the twins appeared at her door, wide-eyed and trembling. "Can we stay with you?" Carter asked, his usual bravado nowhere to be found. "Our room is too scary," Caleb added, clutching his brother's hand. Without hesitation, Marisol welcomed them in, but after 30 minutes of continued storm fury, it became clear that her narrow bed was too small for 3. "I have an idea," she said, gathering her courage along with extra blankets. "Let's go somewhere with a bigger bed." The master bedroom was rarely used, Mrs. Brooks had mentioned once. Julian Mercer often worked, so late that he slept in the small room adjacent to his study. The bed stood pristine and massive in the center of the room that had once belonged to the twins' mother. Marisol helped the boys climb onto the king-sized mattress, creating a nest of blankets around them. She told stories about brave children and gentle monsters until their eyelids grew heavy, despite the continuing storm. Just as they drifted off, curled against her like quotation marks, she heard the unmistakable sound of the front door opening downstairs. Julian Mercer was home early for the first time in a week. Julian Mercer stood frozen in the doorway of the master bedroom, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to cold fury in rapid succession. The tableau before him, his sons curled against the new nanny, in his wife's bed, struck him as a profound violation. The storm outside seemed to echo his internal turmoil, lightning briefly illuminating the scene in harsh white light. "What is the meaning of this?" His voice was dangerously quiet. Marisol carefully disentangled herself from the sleeping twins, moving with deliberate slowness to avoid waking them. She slipped from the bed and approached, Julian keeping her voice low. "Mr. Mercer, the boys were frightened by the storm. My room was too small for all 3. So you thought it appropriate to use this room?" His jaw tightened. "This bedroom is off limits. Everyone in this house knows that. I apologize for overstepping, but they were terrified. Get out." The command was soft, but absolute. "Pack your things and leave. Tonight." Marisol glanced back at the twins, peacefully asleep despite the confrontation happening mere feet away. "Mr. Mercer, please, it's still storming. And I promised the boys—" "I don't care what you promised them." Julian's control was slipping, his voice rising slightly. "You have no right to make promises in my house. You've been here barely a week." 7 days, Marisol confirmed, standing her ground despite her racing heart. "Long enough to see that your sons are drowning in silence and rules while starving for comfort." His eyes widened at her audacity. "You know nothing about my family. I know that Caleb hides a photo of you and his mother under his pillow. I know that Carter collects blue buttons because he was told his mother wore a blue dress the day they were born. I know that. They both think you blame them for her death." Julian took a step back as if she had physically struck him. That's absurd." "Is it?" Marisol kept her voice gentle despite the tension crackling between them. "When was the last time you truly saw them, Mr. Mercer? Not just existed in the same space, but really saw them." For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across his face, a crack in the armor he'd built around himself. Then his expression hardened again. "Mrs. Brooks will issue your final payment. I want you gone within the hour." With that, he turned and strode from the room, leaving Marisol alone with the sleeping twins and the growing certainty that she had just lost the first job she'd actually wanted to keep. She looked at the boys, their small faces relaxed in sleep. For the first time since she'd met them, the thought of them waking to find her gone, becoming another in the long line of adults who had disappeared from their lives, made her stomach clench. Making her decision, Marisol retrieved her notebook from her pocket and wrote quickly by the dim light of the bedside lamp. She placed the note on the nightstand where Julian would find it if he returned, then settled back beside the twins, determined to at least give them one final peaceful night. If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the ones who will. The morning light filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the master bedroom floor. Marisol had been awake for hours, watching the storm fade and dawn arrive with equal measures of resignation and resolve. The twins still slept soundly, their matching dark curls tousled against the pillows. A soft knock preceded Mrs. Brooks entering with a tray of coffee. Her eyebrows rose at finding Marisol still present. "Mr. Mercer informed me you would be leaving," she said, setting down the tray with precise movements. "I couldn't leave while they were sleeping," Marisol explained. "They've had too many disappearances already." Something softened in the older woman's efficient demeanor. "The boys do seem calmer with you." They just need consistency and patience. Mrs. Brooks poured coffee into a delicate china cup. Mr. Mercer left early this morning for a business meeting. He said to ensure you were gone by his return this evening. Marisol nodded, accepting the cup with grateful hands. I understand. However, Mrs. Brooks continued, lowering her voice slightly, he did read your note. Several times. Hope flickered briefly in Marisol's chest before she tamped it down. One note couldn't undo years of grief-enforced distance. The twins woke gradually, first Carter, then Caleb, their initial confusion at their location quickly replaced by comfort at finding Marisol still beside them. You stayed, Caleb observed, his voice colored with surprise. I promised I would, didn't I? Marisol smiled, though the expression felt bittersweet. And it looks like I won our bet. Pancakes tomorrow? The twins exchanged one of their silent communications, clearly sensing something they couldn't quite articulate. Is something wrong? Carter asked, unusually perceptive. Marisol considered. Lying, then decided against it. These boys had experienced enough adult deception. I need to leave today, she said gently. Your father and I had a disagreement. Identical expressions of betrayal and resignation crossed their faces, confirming her worst fears. They had expected this outcome all along. But you said you'd stay, Caleb accused, hurt hardening into anger. Sometimes grown-ups make promises they can't keep, Carter said flatly, the cynicism painful from a 5-year-old mouth. I wanted to stay, Marisol insisted, and I'm not leaving until this afternoon. We still have time together. The boys retreated into themselves, building walls with practiced efficiency. The progress of 7 days evaporated in 7 minutes. They refused breakfast. They ignored her attempts at conversation. When she suggested a final game or story, they turned away in unison, presenting her with twin barriers of rejection. By midday, Marisol had packed her few belongings, the canvas bag no heavier than when she arrived, but her heart considerably so. She made one last attempt, kneeling before the twins in the playroom where they sat in stubborn silence. I want you to have this, she said, offering the wooden puzzle box. To remember me. We don't want it, Caleb said, though his eyes lingered on the object. We don't need anything from you, Carter added. Marisol placed the box between them anyway. Everyone needs something to hold on to. As she stood to leave, Carter suddenly blurted, Why can't you just stay anyway? The question contained all the confused hurt of a child, who didn't understand adult complexities, who simply wanted the comfort of a consistent presence. Sometimes the people in charge make decisions we have to accept, she explained, knowing the answer was insufficient. But that doesn't mean I wanted to go. In a final, desperate attempt to leave them with something meaningful, she knelt again and looked directly into their identical brown eyes. You are not the reason bad things happen, she said firmly. Not your mother, not me leaving. None of it is because of you. Carter's bottom lip trembled. Caleb's hands clenched into small fists. How do you know? Caleb whispered. Because I've seen how brave and smart and kind you both are, even when you're trying not to be. People don't leave because of you. They leave because of grown-up reasons that have nothing to do with how wonderful you are. For a brief moment, the twins' carefully constructed defenses wavered. Then Carter lunged forward, throwing his arms around her neck in a fierce hug. Caleb hesitated only seconds before joining his brother. Marisol held them close, memorizing the feel of their small bodies against hers, the scent of their shampoo, the sound of their uneven breathing. When she finally pulled away, both boys quickly swiped at damp eyes, attempting to recover their composure. Goodbye, Caleb and Carter Mercer, she said softly. It was my honor to know you, even for a short time. She walked away then, not trusting herself to say more. Mrs. Brooks waited in the foyer with her final payment envelope. You made progress with them, the older woman observed. More than anyone else has. Marisol accepted the envelope with a sad smile. Sometimes progress isn't enough. As she walked down the long driveway toward the iron gates, the weight of failure pressed against her chest. The grand white house behind her seemed to mock her brief attempt to bring warmth to its cold corridors. She had nearly reached the gate when a small object came flying. Over the hedge beside her, landing with a clatter on the gravel. Bending to retrieve it, Marisol found a blue button, one of Carter's precious collection. She closed her fingers around it and continued walking, the small circle digging into her palm like a promise she couldn't quite keep. The community shelter on Charleston's east side was a world away from the Mercer estate. Where the mansion had space and silence to spare, the shelter overflowed with noise and need. Marisol found unexpected comfort in its crowded rooms and constant activity, throwing herself into volunteer work to fill the hollow space the twins had left behind. 3 days after her departure from the Mercer household, she was organizing donated clothes when Teresa Romano, the shelter director, approached with an unusual expression. "There's someone asking for you at the front desk," Teresa said, curiosity evident in her tone. "A man in a suit that probably costs more than our monthly operating budget." Marisol's hands stilled on the shirt she was folding. "Did he give a name?" "Julian Mercer. Says he's your former employer." The shirt slipped from Marisol's suddenly numb fingers. She had imagined many scenarios. Over the past 3 days, mostly involving the twins and how they were coping with her absence, but Julian Mercer, seeking her out, had never been among them. "Should I tell him you're busy?" Teresa offered, protective instinct evident in her stance. "No," Marisol decided after a moment. "I'll speak with him." Julian Mercer looked profoundly out of place in the shelter's modest reception area. His tailored suit and polished shoes stood in stark contrast to the worn furniture and linoleum floors. But it was his expression that caught Marisol's attention. The usually controlled mask had slipped, revealing uncertainty and something that looked remarkably like humility. "Miss Dela Cruz," he began, then corrected himself. "Marisol, thank you for seeing me." "Mr. Mercer," she acknowledged, maintaining a careful distance. "Is everything all right with the boys?" A shadow crossed his face. "They haven't spoken since you left. Not to me, not to Mrs. Brooks, not even to each other." The twins' silent protest twisted something in Marisol's chest. Children communicate in many ways. Sometimes silence speaks loudest. Yes, well, they're communicating quite clearly that they want you back. Julian ran a hand through his usually immaculate hair, the gesture betraying his distress. "They've refused to eat properly. They won't go to sleep without—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Without checking under the bed for monsters. Apparently that was something you did." "The monster check was very important," Marisol confirmed, fighting the urge to smile despite the seriousness of the conversation. Julian's shoulders slumped slightly. "I came to offer you your position back, with a substantial raise, of course." The businesslike approach, treating her potential return as a transaction, confirmed what Marisol had already suspected about Julian Mercer. He was a man who understood value and exchange, but struggled with the messier realities of emotional connection. "I'm not interested in a raise, Mr. Mercer," she said carefully. "But before I consider returning, I need to understand what would be different." His eyebrows rose. "Different? Yes. Your household operates under rules and structures that I believe are harmful to your sons. If I return, those would need to change." For a moment, the old defensiveness flashed across his features. Then, remarkably, it faded into something more contemplative. "What sort of changes?" "The cameras in their bedroom and playroom would need to be removed. Children need privacy to develop trust and independence." Julian stiffened. "Those are security measures." "They're surveillance," Marisol corrected gently, "and they send a message that the boys aren't trusted." She continued, emboldened by his silence. "Meals should be taken together whenever possible. No phones at the table. The boys need to see that they're a priority, not an obligation to be scheduled between meetings." Julian's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "Most importantly," Marisol concluded, "I would need to be treated as a partner in their care, not a servant. That means my input is valued and my boundaries respected. I understand you're there, Father, but I bring expertise and perspective that should be considered." A long silence stretched between them. Outside the shelter windows, Charleston life continued. Cars passing, people walking, the rhythmic normalcy that had been absent from the Mercer household for too long. "Those are significant demands," Julian finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "They're not demands, they're conditions for a healthy environment." Marisol met his gaze steadily. "Your sons deserve that." Another pause, then Julian nodded slowly. "I suppose they do." "There's one more thing," Marisol added. "I need an apology." His eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" "Not for me, though that would be appropriate as well. I need you to apologize to your sons for being absent, for letting your grief overshadow their needs. They believe they're responsible for their mother's death and your unhappiness. They need to hear from you that they're not." Color drained from Julian's face. They think he couldn't complete the sentence, horror evident in his expression. I never said, children fill silence with their own explanations, Marisol said softly. And yours have been given plenty of silence to fill. Julian turned away abruptly, moving to the shelter window. His reflection showed a man confronting truths he had carefully avoided for years. When he finally spoke again, his voice held a rawness Marisol hadn't heard before. I don't know how to do this, he admitted quietly. After Sarah died, I just focused on what I could control. Work, schedules, the business of living without really being alive. The boys need more than that, Marisol said, but her tone had softened. They need a father who is present even when it's painful, especially when it's painful. Julian turned back to face her, something resolute settling in his expression. If you return, you wouldn't be staff, you would be, he searched for the right word, a partner in their care, as you said. Equal, Marisol clarified. Heard and respected. Yes, he extended his hand, the gesture formal but sincere. I can agree to those terms. Marisol considered his offered hand, thinking of the twin boys who had briefly let her into their guarded world, of the blue button still tucked in her pocket, of the note she had left that apparently found its mark. She took his hand. I'll return tomorrow morning. Relief washed across Julian's face, quickly masked by his usual reserve, but not before Marisol caught it. Perhaps there was hope for him yet. As Julian turned to leave, Marisol called after him. Mr. Mercer, the monster check involves looking under the bed, in the closet and behind the curtains. You have to make growling noises to scare away any hiding monsters. It's very specific. The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. I'll keep that in mind. After he departed, Teresa appeared beside Marisol with raised eyebrows. Want to tell me what that was about? Marisol's gaze remained on the door where Julian had exited. I think it was about someone learning to stay. The Mercer estate looked different to Marisol as she approached it the second time. Less intimidating, more like a challenge waiting to be met. Mrs. Brooks opened the door before she could knock, her usual composure softened by what might have been relief. The boys are in the kitchen, she said by way of greeting. They've been waiting since dawn. Marisol followed the housekeeper through now familiar corridors, noticing small changes, a vase of fresh flowers where there had been none, blinds open to admit more light, and most surprisingly a child's drawing tacked to the refrigerator door. The twins sat at the kitchen island, identical bowls of untouched cereal before them. When they spotted her, their reactions were a study in contrasts. Carter leapt from his stool with uncharacteristic abandon, while Caleb remained seated, his expression guarded, as if expecting disappointment. You came back, Carter's exclamation held wonder and suspicion in equal measure. I told you I would, Marisol replied, setting down her bag. I just needed to work some things out with your father first. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Are you staying for real this time? That's the plan. The boy studied her face, searching for deception. Promise? Marisol approached slowly and crouched to his eye level. I promise to try my very best. Some things are out of my control, but I will never choose to leave you. It wasn't the absolute guarantee he wanted, but it was honest. After a moment, Caleb gave a small nod of acceptance. We still owe you pancakes, Carter reminded her, already moving toward the refrigerator. We bet. So you did, Marisol smiled. Let's get started. The kitchen soon transformed into a controlled chaos of measuring cups and spilled flour. Mrs. Brooks hovered briefly, before Marisol assured her they would clean up afterward. The twins' initial hesitancy gave way to enthusiasm as they took turns stirring the batter and suggesting additions. Chocolate chips from Caleb, blueberries from Carter. They were so absorbed in their task that they didn't notice Julian's arrival until his voice broke through their concentration. Something smells good. The twins froze, wooden spoons suspended mid-stir. Julian stood in the doorway, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater rather than his usual suit. Another small but significant change. We're making pancakes, Carter finally offered, uncertainty in his voice. So I see. Julian approached slowly, as if afraid of shattering the tentative peace. May I join you? The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning beyond its simple words. This wasn't just about breakfast. It was about entry into a space he'd long abandoned to others. The twins looked to Marisol, silently deferring to her judgment. She nodded encouragingly. There's enough batter for everyone, she said. Julian rolled up his sleeves and washed his hands at the sink. Deliberate, normal actions that nonetheless felt monumental in their context. When he turned back, something in his expression had softened. "I owe you both an apology," he said quietly. "I haven't been the father you deserve." The twins stared at him, identical expressions of confusion on their faces. This was not the distant, distracted father they knew. "I've been away even when I was here," Julian continued, struggling visibly with words that didn't come easily to him. "That wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't because of anything you did." Caleb's spoon clattered against the mixing bowl. "Is it because we made Mom die?" The question struck the kitchen like a physical blow. Julian's face drained of color, and Marisol felt her heart constrict at the matter-of-fact way Caleb had voiced his deepest fear. "No," Julian's voice cracked. He crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt before his sons. "No, your mother's death was not your fault. Not ever. Not for a single moment." "But you never talk about her," Carter said, his voice small. "And you're always sad." "I know." Julian closed his eyes briefly. "I was wrong to keep her memory locked away. I thought it would hurt less, but it just made everything empty." He reached out tentatively, placing a hand on each boy's shoulder. "Your mother loved you before she ever met you. She used to talk to you, sing to you. She had names picked out when she was barely showing." The twins were motionless, absorbing this rare offering of information about the woman they'd never known. "She would be so proud of you both," Julian continued, his voice steady despite the moisture gathering in his eyes. "And she would be very disappointed in me for keeping her away from you, even in memory." Caleb reached up hesitantly, touching his father's cheek with flour-covered fingers. "You're crying." "Yes," Julian acknowledged simply. "Sometimes grown-ups cry too." Carter shifted closer. "Like when you miss someone?" Exactly like that. The tension that had held the kitchen in its grip began to dissolve, replaced by something fragile but precious, a beginning. "The pancakes are getting cold," Caleb observed practically, though he made no move to step away from his father. Julian laughed, a rusty sound as if long unused. "Then we should eat them." Marisol discreetly wiped her own eyes as she arranged plates on the table, a table that, for the first time since she'd arrived, would seat the entire family together. Over the following weeks, the Mercer household underwent a subtle transformation. The cameras disappeared from the children's spaces. Dinner became a consistent family affair, with phones banished by mutual agreement. Julian adjusted his work schedule to be home by 6:03. Days a week. Not perfect, but progress. Most significantly, photos of Sarah Mercer began to reappear throughout the house. Not in solemn, shrine-like displays, but integrated naturally, her smiling face watching over everyday moments, becoming part of the family's present rather than a forbidden past. The first framed photo appeared on the mantel, Sarah in a blue dress, her hands resting on her pregnant belly, her smile radiant. The twins studied it with solemn fascination. "She was pretty," Carter observed. "She had your eyes," Marisol told them, noting the identical shape and color they'd inherited. "Dad says she liked to sing really loud in the car," Caleb added, a new piece of information clearly treasured. The changes weren't without challenges. Julian still retreated into work when emotions became overwhelming. The twins still tested boundaries, especially when routines changed, and Marisol sometimes found herself negotiating the delicate balance between employee and family member, never quite belonging to either category completely. But the atmosphere of the house had undeniably shifted. Laughter no longer seemed out of place in its grand rooms. Muddy footprints occasionally tracked across pristine floors. The garden gained a tire swing hanging from the massive oak tree. One evening, as summer faded toward autumn, Marisol found Julian alone on the back terrace, watching the twins chase fireflies across the lawn. "They're thriving," she said, joining him at the railing. Julian nodded, his gaze following his son's exuberant movements. "Thanks to you." "Not just me," Marisol corrected gently. "You've done the hard work of showing up." "It still feels incomplete," Julian admitted, "like I'm playing a role I was never prepared for." "That's parenthood," Marisol smiled. "No one is ever truly prepared." They stood in companionable silence, watching darkness settle over the garden, while the boys' laughter floated up to them like bubbles in still water. "Sarah would approve of you," Julian said suddenly. She valued honesty above all else and courage. The unexpected compliment warmed Marisol more than she cared to admit. "I wish I could have known her." So do I, Julian replied softly. Then, with a small smile, though she might have been intimidated by your pancake-making skills, hers always stuck to the pan. It was the first time he'd shared something about Sarah that wasn't solemn or significant, just a small ordinary detail that made her human rather than saintly. Progress indeed. October brought cooler weather and the twins' 6th birthday. Planning the celebration became a family project that revealed how far they had come and how far they still had to go. We've never had a real party, Carter explained as they made lists at the kitchen table. Just cake with Dad after dinner. And presents, Caleb added loyally. Julian, reviewing the growing list of potential guests and activities, looked increasingly overwhelmed. Perhaps we should consider a professional event planner. We don't need a professional, Marisol countered. The boys know what they want. We just need to listen. What the twins wanted, it turned out, was surprisingly modest. A treasure hunt in the garden, chocolate cake with blue frosting, and permission to invite 4 friends each from their kindergarten class. The simplicity of their wishes spoke volumes about their previous birthdays. On the morning of the party, Marisol found Julian in his study, staring at a small velvet box open on his desk. Sarah had these made when she learned we were having twins, he explained without looking up. She planned to give them on their 5th birthday. Last year I just couldn't. Inside the box nestled 2 identical silver compass pendants, small enough for a child's hand but finely crafted. So they would always find their way home, Julian continued softly, and always find each other. Marisol touched one pendant gently. They're perfect, and it's not too late. The party transformed the usually sedate Mercer garden into a landscape of colorful balloons and laughing children. Julian moved somewhat stiffly among the parents, his social muscles clearly atrophied, but making a genuine effort. The twins darted between activity stations, their excitement visible in flushed cheeks and constant motion. They're different, observed Miss Kennedy, the twins' kindergarten teacher, as she accepted a glass of lemonade from Marisol. More confident, more settled. They're finding their footing, Marisol agreed. And so is their father, it seems. Miss Kennedy nodded toward Julian, who was awkwardly but enthusiastically helping a group of children decipher a treasure map. He never used to attend parent meetings. Now he's asked to volunteer for the fall festival. Warmth spread through Marisol's chest at this evidence of Julian's expanding involvement. She watched as he knelt to examine a clue a small girl thrust toward him, his expression of exaggerated concentration drawing giggles from the children. Later, as the party wound down and guests departed, Julian gathered the family beneath the oak tree. He presented the compass pendants with a short but heartfelt explanation of their origin, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. The twins accepted the gifts with unusual solemnity, turning the silver discs in their small hands. "Mom picked these for us?" Carter asked. Julian nodded. "She wanted you to have them when you were old enough to understand their meaning. Do they really work?" Caleb examined the directional markings with scientific interest. "They do," Julian confirmed. "But more importantly, they're a reminder that you always have a place you belong, and people who will help you find your way back to it." The boys exchanged one of their twin looks, a silent conversation passing between them. Then, in a synchronized movement that could not have been rehearsed, they placed the pendants around their necks. "Thanks, Dad," they said in unison. As the household settled into its new rhythms, Marisol found herself increasingly drawn into the Mercer family orbit, her role expanding beyond its original boundaries. She helped the twins with homework, attended their school performances, and gradually became the person they sought for both practical assistance and emotional comfort. Julian, too, began to rely on her presence, consulting her about parenting decisions, sharing small victories, and occasionally revealing fragments of his slowly healing grief. Their professional relationship evolved into something warmer, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. It was Mrs. Brooks who first named the shift, cornering Marisol in the laundry room. One November afternoon. "You're becoming indispensable," the housekeeper observed, her tone carefully neutral. "To all of them." Marisol continued folding small T-shirts. "That's my job." "No," Mrs. Brooks countered. "Your job was to care for the children. What you're doing now goes well beyond that job description." Marisol paused, a half-folded shirt in her hands. "Is that a problem?" "Not for me." Mrs. Brooks arranged detergent bottles with unnecessary precision, "but it might become one for you." I'm not sure I understand. The older woman sighed. Attachments in this line of work are complicated, especially when they cross certain lines. Marisol felt heat rise to her cheeks. I haven't crossed any lines. Not yet, Mrs. Brooks agreed. But I've worked in this house for 12 years. I recognize the signs of a family reforming itself around a new center. And you, Miss Dela Cruz, are becoming that center. The observation lingered in Marisol's mind long after the conversation ended. She had maintained professional boundaries throughout her career, never allowing herself to become too emotionally invested in temporary arrangements. But the Mercer family had somehow slipped past her carefully constructed defenses. The truth confronted her one evening when Caleb, drowsy after his bedtime story, murmured, "Night, Mom," before catching himself in horror. I mean, Marisol. I meant Marisol. His distress was immediate and overwhelming. I'm sorry, I didn't mean— It's okay, she assured him quickly, though her own heart raced at the implications. It was just a sleepy mistake. But later, alone in her room, she faced the reality of her situation. She had allowed herself to become emotionally tethered to this family in ways that could ultimately hurt everyone involved. She was not, after all, their mother. She was an employee, however valued. And one day, inevitably, that employment would end. The question was, what should she do about it now? The holiday season descended upon Charleston with twinkling lights and cooler air, bringing with it both festive anticipation and unexpected complications. For the first time in years, the Mercer house was fully decorated. A massive pine tree dominated the foyer, garlands adorned the staircase, and the twins' handmade ornaments hung proudly alongside heirloom crystal. It was during the tree decorating that Marisol noticed Julian watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret, thoughtful perhaps or concerned. He'd been quieter than usual in recent days, often retreating to his study after dinner instead of joining their evening routines. "Is everything all right?" she asked when the twins had gone upstairs to prepare for bed. Julian adjusted an ornament before answering. "I received a letter from Sarah's parents yesterday. They want to visit for Christmas." The statement carried more weight than its simple words suggested. In the months Marisol had been with the family, the maternal grandparents had never been mentioned beyond a brief explanation that they lived in Boston and relations were complicated. "That's wonderful," she offered carefully. "The boys would love to meet their grandparents." "They've met them," Julian corrected, though not since they were 3. "Robert and Eleanor have strong opinions about how the boys should be raised, and about my fitness as a parent." Understanding dawned. "They disapproved of your parenting? They believed the boys should live with them after Sarah died." Julian's voice held old tensions. There were legal discussions. It wasn't amicable. "And now they want to visit." Marisol processed this new information. "Why now?" Julian's gaze returned to the tree, but his focus seemed far away. "They've been receiving regular updates from someone in the household. Photos, reports on the boys' development." His eyes shifted back to her. "They mentioned how much the twins have improved under the care of their Filipino nanny." The implication hung between them. Someone had been communicating with the grandparents without Julian's knowledge. "It wasn't me," Marisol said quietly. "I know." Julian's response came quickly, with certainty that eased a tension she hadn't realized she was holding. "My suspicion is Mrs. Brooks. She was close with Sarah and has always maintained contact with her parents. So what will— You do?" Julian straightened. An already perfect row of stockings hung along the mantel. "I've invited them for Christmas week. It's time the boys had a relationship with all their family. And perhaps—" he hesitated— "perhaps it's time I stopped seeing them as adversaries." The maturity of this decision, choosing reconciliation over continued estrangement, struck Marisol as yet another sign of Julian's evolution. "That's very generous," she said. "It's necessary," he corrected, "for the twins, and probably overdue." He turned to face her fully. "But there's something else we need to discuss. Something Caleb said to me during his bedtime routine last night." Marisol's stomach tightened, remembering Caleb's slip from several nights before. "He called me Mom." Julian nodded. "He's confused about your role. And to be honest, so am I." "I'm sorry," Marisol began. "I never encouraged—" "I know you didn't," Julian interrupted gently. "But the fact remains that you've become essential to this family in ways that exceed your job description. The boys love you, they trust you, and the boundaries between caregiver and—" but he searched for the right word. something more significant have blurred. The conversation she'd been both anticipating and dreading had arrived. Marisol braced herself for what would come next, a reminder of professional distance, perhaps, or a redefinition of her role. What she didn't expect was Julian's next words. "I'd like to establish something more permanent," he said. "A formal arrangement that better reflects your place in their lives." Marisol blinked. "I don't understand." "I'm offering you a permanent position. Not as a nanny, but as the boy's guardian in the event something happens to me. And as—" he hesitated, clearly navigating unfamiliar emotional territory. "As someone with legal standing in their lives. A co-parent of sorts." The proposal stunned her into silence. It was both more and less than the scenarios she'd imagined during her late-night worries. "This isn't a romantic overture," Julian clarified, perhaps misreading her reaction. "It's a practical solution to the reality we've created. The boys need stability. They need to know you won't simply disappear when they're older or when your contract ends." "And what about you?" Marisol asked, finding her voice. "What do you need, Julian?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He turned back to the Christmas tree, adjusting an ornament that required no adjustment. "I need my sons to be happy," he said finally. "You make them happy." It wasn't a complete answer, but it was honest, and it contained the essence of the man she'd come to know, someone who prioritized his children's well-being, even when it pushed him beyond his emotional comfort zone. "I need time to think about this," she said. Julian nodded. "Of course, it's a significant decision. And there's the matter of your in-laws' visit," Marisol added. "Perhaps we should revisit this conversation after the holidays." A reasonable suggestion. Julian's professional demeanor reasserted itself, as if relieved to retreat to more familiar ground. "Though I would appreciate if you could help prepare the boys for their grandparents' arrival. They may have some complicated feelings about it." Marisol nodded, grateful for the shift to practical matters. "I'll talk to them tomorrow." Later that night, as she sat in her room trying to process Julian's unexpected proposal, a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Mrs. Brooks standing in the hallway, her usual crisp efficiency replaced by uncharacteristic hesitation. "May I come in?" the older woman asked. Marisol stepped aside, suddenly certain this visit related to the earlier revelation about contact with the grandparents. Mrs. Brooks remained standing, her posture rigid. "Mr. Mercer informed me that Sarah's parents will be visiting for Christmas." "Yes? I assume he also mentioned his suspicions about who has been keeping them informed about the boys." Marisol considered deflection, then opted for honesty. "He did. I won't apologize for it." Mrs. Brooks's chin lifted slightly. "Sarah was like a daughter to me. Her parents deserved to know their grandsons were well." "I understand," Marisol said, and found that she genuinely did. Family connections matter. Something in Mrs. Brooks' expression softened marginally. "Yes, they do." She smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from her skirt. "Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. Mr. Mercer has informed me of his proposal to you." Marisol felt a flash of irritation that Julian had shared their private conversation. "Has he?" "He values my input on household matters," Mrs. Brooks said, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "And in this case, I agree with his assessment of the situation. The boys need stability. You provide that." Coming from the usually reserved housekeeper, this was high praise indeed. "Thank you," Marisol said, genuinely touched. "However," Mrs. Brooks continued, "there are complexities you should consider before accepting." Such as the fact that while Mr. Mercer may see this as a practical arrangement, others will view it differently, including potentially Sarah's parents. Understanding dawned. "You think they'll object to my role in the boys' lives?" "I think they may question it." Mrs. Brooks chose her words carefully. "Robert and Eleanor Whitmore are traditional people with traditional expectations about family structure. They were raised in wealth and have certain prejudices about those who weren't." The implication was clear. A Filipino immigrant with no formal education beyond high school might not meet the Whitmore's standards for someone helping to raise their grandsons. "I see," Marisol said quietly. "That doesn't mean you should decline Mr. Mercer's offer," Mrs. Brooks added, surprising Marisol. "Merely that you should be prepared for potential resistance." As the housekeeper turned to leave, she paused at the door. For what it's worth, Miss Dela Cruz, I believe you've done more for this family in a few months than anyone has in years, including me. The admission clearly cost her something in professional pride. We've all done our best, Marisol offered, in different ways. Mrs. Brooks nodded once, then departed, leaving Marisol with even more to consider as Christmas and the Whitmores' visit approached. Snow was rare in Charleston, but on the morning the Whitmores were scheduled to arrive, delicate flakes drifted from a pearl-grey sky, dusting the Mercer estate in a fine white powder. The twins pressed their faces against the library windows, marveling at the unexpected weather. "Does this mean Grandma and Grandpa can't come?" Carter asked, his tone suggesting this outcome wouldn't entirely disappoint him. "No, sweetheart," Marisol replied, adjusting his collar. "Their flight landed an hour ago. They'll be here soon." Both boys wore new outfits for the occasion, pressed slacks and button-down shirts that made them look older and strangely formal. Julian had been up since dawn, alternating between last-minute household instructions and retreating to his study for one more important call. Tension hummed through the house like an electrical current, affecting everyone from Mrs. Brooks, who had been polishing already spotless silver since breakfast, to the twins who had abandoned their usual boisterous play for subdued nervousness. "What do we call them?" Caleb asked suddenly. "Grandma and Grandpa would be appropriate," Marisol suggested. "But we don't know them," Carter countered with child's logic. "Not really." "You did when you were younger," Julian said, entering the room with forced casualness. "They used to visit more often." "Before Mom died?" Caleb's question held no accusation, just curiosity. Julian nodded, coming to stand beside his sons at the window. "Yes, they used to stay for weeks in the summer. Your grandmother would read to you for hours. Your grandfather taught you to identify different birds in the garden." This glimpse into a past the boys couldn't remember seemed to both fascinate and unsettle them. "Why did they stop coming?" Carter asked. Julian exchanged a glance with Marisol over the boys' heads, weighing honesty against age-appropriate explanation. "Sometimes grown-ups disagree about important things," he said carefully. "Your grandparents and I had different ideas about certain matters after your mother passed away, but that doesn't mean they stopped loving you." Before either twin could ask follow-up questions, the doorbell chimed through the house. Julian straightened, adjusting his tie with uncharacteristic nervousness. "That will be them," he said. "Shall we go say hello?" The Whitmores stood in the foyer like visitors from another era, elegant, formal, and radiating a particular kind of old-money refinement that seemed to demand the house itself stand straighter. Eleanor Whitmore, tall and silver-haired, surveyed the entrance hall with an appraising eye, while her husband, equally distinguished with his bow tie and wire-rimmed glasses, handed their coats to Mrs. Brooks. "Julian," Eleanor's greeting was polite but cool. Then her gaze fell on the twins, and her expression transformed. "And here they are. My goodness, how you've grown." The boys hung back slightly, half hidden behind their father's legs. Marisol remained a few steps behind, observing the reunion with careful attention. "Boys," Julian prompted gently, "say hello to your grandmother and grandfather." "Hello," they chorused dutifully. Robert Whitmore crouched down, bringing himself to their eye level. "The last time I saw you, you barely reached my knees. Do you remember how we used to feed the ducks at the pond?" The twins shook their heads, but their rigid postures relaxed slightly at his warm tone. "Well, we'll make new memories this visit," Eleanor declared, her gaze finally landing on Marisol. "And you must be Miss Dela Cruz. We've heard a great deal about you." Marisol stepped forward, extending her hand with a polite smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore. Welcome to Charleston." Eleanor's handshake was brief but not overtly dismissive. "Thank you. I understand you've been quite a positive influence on our grandsons." "Marisol teaches us Filipino words," Caleb offered unexpectedly, "and how to make special pancakes." "And she checks for monsters," Carter added, warming to the topic. "Every night. Even Dad does it now." This casual revelation, that Julian had adopted one of Marisol's nurturing routines, caused Eleanor's eyebrows to rise fractionally. Her gaze traveled between Julian and Marisol, assessment evident in her expression. "How comprehensive," she commented. "Perhaps we could move to the sitting room. It's been a long journey." The initial awkwardness gradually eased as the day progressed. The Whitmores brought gifts for the twins, illustrated books, hand-carved wooden animals, and a family photo album that captured Sarah at various ages. This last gift proved particularly captivating, and soon everyone gathered around the coffee table as the boys excitedly identified similarities between themselves and their mother. "You have her eyes," Eleanor told Caleb, her finger tracing a photo of Sarah at age 6, "and Carter has her smile." "Dad says she sang really loud in the car," Carter informed her. "Terribly off-key," Robert confirmed with a fond smile, "but with great enthusiasm." "Just like Carter," Julian remarked, the first genuinely relaxed comment he'd made since their arrival. "And she collected stones from every beach she visited," Eleanor added, "just like Caleb does with his rocks." This exchange of memories, the weaving together of past and present, seemed to bridge some of the distance between the estranged family members. Marisol watched the twins absorb these new pieces of their mother's history, filling gaps in their understanding of both her and themselves. When the boys eventually ran out to play in the light snow that continued to fall, the adults remained in a moment of weighted silence. "They seem well," Eleanor finally said, addressing Julian directly. "Better than the report suggested." Julian's jaw tightened slightly at this. Confirmation of the reports, but he nodded. "They've made significant progress in recent months. Due in large part to Miss Dela Cruz, we understand," Robert said, turning his attention to Marisol. "Mrs. Brooks speaks very highly of your methods." Marisol inclined her head. The boys simply needed consistency and patience, and to feel secure in their home. "Yes, well," Eleanor's tone cooled slightly. "Children do need security, which is why stable family structures are so important." The implied criticism hung in the air. Julian straightened in his chair. "If you're suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Eleanor interrupted smoothly, "merely observing that these arrangements can be complicated." "Arrangements?" Marisol asked, though she suspected she knew exactly what Eleanor meant. "Household staff becoming overly involved in family matters," Eleanor clarified. "Lines of authority becoming blurred. It can confuse children about proper familial roles." Julian set down his teacup with deliberate care. "Marisol is not household staff, Eleanor. She's an essential part of this family." The statement, simple, direct, and unequivocal, sent a rush of warmth through Marisol, even as it visibly startled the Whitmores. "I see." Eleanor's gaze shifted between them, calculating. "And what exactly does that mean in practical terms?" Before Julian could respond, Robert placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm. "Perhaps this isn't the appropriate time for such discussions, dear. We've only just arrived." Eleanor subsided, though her penetrating gaze suggested the topic was merely postponed, not abandoned. "You're right, of course," she conceded. "We have a week to become reacquainted. No need to address everything at once." But as the afternoon progressed into evening, Marisol felt the weight of Eleanor's assessment following her through the house, measuring, evaluating, finding potential flaws in the careful balance the Mercer household had established. The twins, oblivious to the undercurrents, were gradually warming to their grandparents. By dinner, they were eagerly showing Robert their collections, Carter's buttons and Caleb's rocks, while Eleanor examined their schoolwork with genuine interest. It was only when the boys were preparing for bed that the facade cracked slightly. As Marisol supervised their toothbrushing, she overheard Eleanor's voice from the hallway. "Cannot believe you've allowed this level of influence, Julian. She's practically assumed Sarah's role." "That's not what's happening." Julian's response was low but firm. "And I would appreciate if you didn't make assumptions based on a few hours' observation." "She has them calling her mom." "That happened once by accident," Julian interrupted, "and it was addressed immediately." Marisol gently closed the bathroom door, shielding the twins from the conversation, but Carter's serious expression suggested he'd heard enough. "Grandma doesn't like you," he stated with characteristic bluntness. "She doesn't know me yet," Marisol corrected. "Sometimes people need time to understand new situations." Caleb frowned at his reflection in the mirror. "Are you leaving? Because Grandma and Grandpa are here?" The question revealed the twins' persistent fear of abandonment, a wound that had begun to heal but could still reopen with frightening ease. "No," Marisol assured them firmly, "I'm not going anywhere." But as she tucked them into bed and performed the now ritual monster check, she wondered if circumstances beyond her control might eventually make that promise impossible to keep. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the brief snow already melting under a pale winter sun. The tension that had characterized the first days of the Whitmores' visit had not dissipated entirely, but had evolved into something more complex, a cautious dance of competing concerns centered around the twins. Marisol rose early, preparing hot chocolate and cinnamon rolls as the boys had requested for their holiday breakfast. She was arranging mugs on a tray when Eleanor entered the kitchen, already immaculately dressed despite the early hour. "You're quite dedicated," the older woman observed, her tone neutral but her gaze assessing. "Up before everyone else." "Christmas morning is special for children," Marisol replied simply. "I wanted everything ready when they—" "Wake up." Eleanor nodded, then unexpectedly stepped forward. "May I help?" The offer surprised Marisol, but she nodded. "Of course. Perhaps you could arrange the napkins." They worked in silence for several minutes, the domestic task creating an unexpected bridge between them. Finally, Eleanor spoke again. "I've been watching you with my grandsons," she said. "You genuinely care for them." It wasn't a question, but Marisol answered anyway. "I do, very much. When we first heard about you—" Eleanor paused, apparently reconsidering her words. "We were concerned about Julian's judgment. He hasn't always made the best decisions regarding the boys' care." Marisol concentrated on stirring the hot chocolate, choosing her response carefully. "Grief affects people differently. Sometimes it makes the simplest decisions feel impossible." "Yes," Eleanor agreed softly. "I know something about that." The simple acknowledgement of shared understanding, that both women knew the paralyzing force of loss, shifted something in the atmosphere between them. "Sarah was our only child," Eleanor continued, folding a napkin with precise movements. "When she died, we lost not just our daughter, but the future we had imagined. Holidays with grandchildren, family traditions carried forward." She straightened a spoon that needed no straightening. "We wanted to step in because we believed Julian couldn't manage alone. Perhaps we didn't consider that our own grief might cloud our judgment as well." This admission, vulnerable and honest, caught Marisol off guard. "You were trying to protect what remained of your family." "Yes." Eleanor's gaze met hers directly. "As I believe are you." Before Marisol could respond, the thundering of small feet announced the twins' awakening. They burst into the kitchen in matching pajamas, excitement radiating from them like heat. "It's Christmas," Caleb exclaimed unnecessarily. "Santa came," Carter added, bouncing on his toes. Eleanor's face transformed, her reserve melting into genuine warmth. "Merry Christmas, darlings. Shall we wake Grandpa and your father for presents?" The morning unfolded in a blur of torn wrapping paper and exclamations of delight. The twins received books, games, and a joint gift of junior science equipment that prompted immediate experimentation at the dining table. Julian seemed more relaxed than he had since the Whitmores' arrival, laughing openly at the boys' enthusiasm. Marisol had purchased modest gifts for everyone: hand-knitted scarves for the twins, a leather journal for Julian, and elegant bookmarks for the Whitmores. She was touched when Eleanor immediately placed hers in the novel she was reading, a small gesture of acceptance. "There's one more gift," Julian announced when the flurry of unwrapping had subsided. He retrieved an envelope from the mantel and handed it to Marisol. "This is from me and the boys." Inside she found a legal document, official-looking with stamps and signatures. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading, a formal guardianship arrangement naming her as the twins' legal guardian in the event of Julian's incapacity or death, with provisions for her continued residence in the home and financial support. "We had it drawn up last week," Julian explained, his eyes seeking her reaction. "It's the practical component of what we discussed. If you accept." Marisol felt the weight of all eyes upon her. Julian's hopeful, the twins curious, and the Whitmores surprised. "I don't understand," Robert said, breaking the silence. "You're making Miss De La Cruz their legal guardian? Over family?" "Not over you," Julian clarified. "In addition to you. The document names both Marisol and you as co-guardians, with equal standing." Eleanor's eyebrows rose. "You didn't discuss this with us." "No," Julian acknowledged, "because it wasn't about replacing you in their lives. It was about legally recognizing Marisol's role as it already exists." Marisol finally found her voice. "This is significant, Julian. It's what we all need," he said simply. "Security, continuity, family, in its broadest definition." The twins, sensing the importance of the moment, even if they didn't fully understand the legal implications, moved to stand beside Marisol. "Does this mean you're really staying forever?" Caleb asked, his hand slipping into hers. The question crystallized everything. Her place in this household, the connections she'd formed, the love that had grown almost imperceptibly until it had become as natural as breathing. "Yes," she said, squeezing his small hand. "If that's what you want." Carter nodded emphatically. "We want." Robert cleared his throat. "This is rather unorthodox." "So is life," Julian countered mildly. "Especially family life." Eleanor studied the scene before her, the twins flanking Marisol, Julian's protective stance nearby, and something in her expression softened. "Sarah would approve, I think," she said finally. "She always valued substance over form, and she would want them to be loved, above all else." It wasn't an enthusiastic endorsement, but it was acceptance, and for now that was enough. The remainder of the Whitmore's visit passed with increasing comfort. The formal lines that had initially divided the household gradually blurred as they all oriented themselves around what truly mattered, the twins' well-being and happiness. On their final evening, as snow began to fall again outside the windows, they gathered in the living room. The twins, exhausted from a day of board games and outdoor play, had fallen asleep on the couch, their heads resting against each other in mirror symmetry. "They'll remember this Christmas," Robert observed, watching his grandsons with undisguised affection. "It's good for them to have these memories." "We'd like to visit more regularly," Eleanor added, addressing both Julian and Marisol. "Perhaps the boys could come to Boston in the summer." "I think they'd like that," Julian agreed. As the adults continued their tentative planning, Marisol slipped out to the kitchen to prepare tea. She was arranging cups on a tray when Julian joined her. "You've been quiet today," he observed. "I've been thinking," she admitted, "about everything that's changed, about what happens next." Julian leaned against the counter, his posture more relaxed than she'd ever seen it. "Having second thoughts about the guardianship?" "No," she said honestly, "but I'm considering what it means. For all of us." He studied her face, seeming to search for something specific. "The arrangement doesn't have to be purely legal, you know. Over time it could evolve into something else." The implied possibility hung between them. Not a declaration, but an opening. A doubt left slightly ajar. "One step at a time," Marisol suggested gently. "We've all been through significant changes this year. There's no rush to define everything at once." Julian nodded, relief and something like hope crossing his features. "Wise, as always." He picked up the tea tray. "Shall we rejoin the others?" As they walked back toward the living room, Julian paused. "Thank you," he said, quietly, "for staying when it would have been easier to leave." Marisol smiled. "Some things are worth staying for." The Whitmores departed the next morning, leaving behind promises of future visits, several new photo albums, and a sense of reconnection that had seemed impossible just a week earlier. As the car pulled away down the driveway, the twins waved enthusiastically from the front steps. "Do you think they'll really come back?" Caleb asked as they returned inside. "I do," Marisol assured him. "Family has a way of finding its way home, even after getting lost for a while." Carter considered this, then nodded with the solemn certainty of a 6-year-old philosopher. "Like the compasses from Mom." "Exactly like that," Julian agreed, resting a hand on each boy's shoulder. "Now who wants to help take down the Christmas tree?" "Not yet," the twins protested in unison. "Just one more day," Caleb negotiated. Julian laughed. "One more day it is." As the boys raced off to play with their new gifts, Julian turned to Marisol. "I thought we might discuss expanding the household, not immediately, but perhaps in the coming year." Marisol raised an eyebrow. "Expanding?" "There's a young girl at the community shelter," Julian explained. "Teresa mentioned her during the Christmas charity drive. Cassidy, I believe. 14 years old, in need of a stable placement, apparently quite talented with art." The unexpected proposal, so different from what she had anticipated, left Marisol momentarily speechless. "You want to foster a teenager? I thought we might consider it," Julian clarified. "You have experience with children of various ages. The twins could benefit from an older presence, and from what Teresa described, this young woman could use a family who understands how to rebuild after loss." The thoughtfulness behind the suggestion, not just the generosity of opening their home, but the recognition of their unique qualifications to help a child who had experienced disruption, touched Marisol deeply. That's not what I expected you to suggest, she admitted. Julian smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. I'm learning to think beyond the expected. You taught me that. As winter gave way to spring, the Mercer household continued its evolution. The formal guardianship papers were finalized, giving Marisol legal standing in the twins' lives. The Whitmores called weekly, their conversations with the boys growing more natural and affectionate, and preliminary discussions began about welcoming Cassidy Lane for an initial visit. One evening, as February rain tapped against the windows, Marisol found Julian in his study reviewing architectural plans. "What's this?" she asked, noting the detailed drawings of what appeared to be a small building. "Plans for the Oak House," he explained, "a healing center for children who have experienced trauma or disruption, focused on arts-based therapies initially, but potentially expanding into other approaches." Marisol studied the drawings with growing appreciation. "This is a significant undertaking." "I have significant resources," Julian said simply, "and recent experience with the transformative power of the right support at the right time." His gaze met hers. "I thought you might consider co-directing it. Your background in childcare, combined with your innate understanding of what children need to feel secure, it would be invaluable." The offer represented yet another evolution in their relationship, a partnership extending beyond the twins to a broader vision of healing and growth. "I'd need to think about it," Marisol said, though already she could envision the possibilities, "and perhaps get some additional training." "Of course," Julian agreed. "There's no rush. The property adjacent to the estate just became available, which prompted the initial planning, but construction wouldn't begin until summer at the earliest." As they discussed the potential project, the twins appeared in the doorway in pajamas, ready for their bedtime routine. "Monster check time," Carter announced. "And a story," Caleb added hopefully. Julian rose from his desk. "I believe it's my turn for the monster check. Marisol, would you select the story?" They moved together toward the boys' bedroom, a well-choreographed routine that had become the comfortable rhythm of their shared life. As Julian made a great show of checking under beds and behind curtains, complete with growling noises that sent the twins into fits of giggles, Marisol watched from the doorway. This was family, not as she had imagined it perhaps, but genuine and solid nonetheless, built not from obligation or biology but from choice, from staying when it would have been easier to leave, from love that grew in unexpected places, between people who had all in their own ways been lost until they found each other. Spring came to Charleston in a riot of azaleas and dogwoods, transforming the Mercer Estate's formal gardens into a canvas of pink and white. The massive oak tree that had stood sentinel through the family's evolution sprouted tender new leaves, and beneath its spreading branches, a new tradition was taking root. Sunday afternoons had become what the twins called Oak House planning time, when everyone gathered at the wrought iron table under the tree to discuss the developing project. Today, the table was covered with drawings, some professional architectural renderings, others clearly created by children's hands. "I think the art room should have really big windows," Caleb explained, pointing to his colorful sketch, "so you can see the trees while you're painting. And beanbag chairs," Carter added with authority. "Lots of them, in all different colors." Julian noted their suggestions on his tablet, treating each idea with the same seriousness he applied to board meetings. "What do you think, Cassidy? You'll be one of our first art mentors after all." The teenager, sitting at the far end of the table, looked up from her sketchbook. At 14, Cassidy Lane carried herself with the careful self-containment of someone who had learned to take up minimal space in the world. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her clothes, though new, were chosen for utility rather than style. But her eyes, when she forgot to guard them, revealed both intelligence and hunger, for stability, for connection, for a chance to belong. "Natural light is important for accurate color work," she said, her voice quiet but confident when discussing her passion. "And comfortable seating encourages longer creative sessions, but we also need proper storage for supplies and a good cleaning area." "Excellent points," Julian approved. "Marisol, could you add those to our essential features list?" Marisol nodded, making notes in the leather-bound journal that had become the unofficial record of the Oak House's development. Cassidy had been visiting the Mercer home every weekend for 2 months now, part of a gradual transition program designed by social services. If all continued well, she would move in permanently before the summer, Julian had already converted a third-floor room into a teenager's sanctuary, with Cassidy's cautious input. "When can we start building?" Carter asked impatiently. "You've been planning forever." "Construction begins next month," Julian reminded him. "But a project like this takes time to do properly. Remember how we talked about patience?" Carter sighed dramatically. "Patience is boring, but worth it for important things," Marisol added, sharing an amused glance with Julian. The planning session continued until Mrs. Brooks appeared with a tray of lemonade and cookies. The housekeeper's initial skepticism about the Oak House project had gradually transformed into practical support, particularly after she'd witnessed Cassidy's emerging talent with both art and the twins, whom she treated with the affectionate exasperation of an older sister. "The Whitmores called," Mrs. Brooks announced as she set down the tray. "They're confirming their arrival next Friday for the boys' spring break visit." The twins cheered. Their relationship with their grandparents had flourished in the months since Christmas, nurtured by regular video calls and care packages from Boston. The upcoming visit would be their first extended stay with the Whitmores since infancy, a week-long trip that represented a significant milestone in the family's healing. "Do we need to pack our warm clothes?" Caleb asked practically. "Grandma said Boston is colder than Charleston." "We'll pack appropriate clothes for you," Marisol assured him. "But yes, you'll need warmer layers than you're used to." As the afternoon progressed, their discussion expanded beyond immediate plans to larger visions for the Oak House. Julian had secured non-profit status for the center and assembled a preliminary board of directors that included child development experts, artists, and community leaders. Marisol had enrolled in a child psychology certificate program to complement her experiential knowledge, and local schools had already expressed interest in partnering for after-school programs. What had begun as a personal healing project had evolved into something with potential community-wide impact. "We should invite Teresa from the shelter to join the board," Marisol suggested, as they reviewed the current membership. "Her experience with displaced families would be invaluable." Julian nodded. "Excellent idea. I'll reach out to her this week." As the planning session wound down, the twins dragged Cassidy off to show her their latest science experiment, leaving Julian and Marisol alone beneath the oak tree. The easy camaraderie between them had deepened over the months into something more nuanced, a partnership built on mutual respect that was gradually opening to other possibilities. "Eleanor called me directly yesterday," Julian mentioned, gathering scattered papers. "She wanted to discuss Cassidy's placement with us." Marisol looked up, surprised. "What did she say?" "She offered to fund a college savings account for her." Julian's expression held wonder at his mother-in-law's evolving perspective. "She said every child who becomes part of this family should have the same opportunities." "That's remarkably generous," Marisol observed. "It's more than that," Julian corrected gently. "It's acceptance of what we're building here, of you." The significance wasn't lost on Marisol. Eleanor Whitmore's initial reservations about her role in the twins' lives had been a source of tension, even after the Christmas reconciliation. This gesture represented a final acknowledgement that the unconventional family they had created was, in fact, a family, worthy of investment and legacy planning. "Speaking of building," Julian continued, his tone deliberately casual, though his eyes held intensity, "I've been thinking about the East Wing renovation. The architectural team suggested it would make sense to connect my suite with yours during the process, to create a more cohesive family living space." The suggestion contained layers of meaning beyond its practical aspects. In the months since Christmas, their relationship had evolved with deliberate slowness, shared responsibilities giving way to shared confidences, professional respect deepening into personal connection. There had been quiet dinners after the twins were asleep, long conversations about dreams and fears, and, gradually, tentatively, the first careful steps towards something more intimate. "That would be a significant change," Marisol noted, matching his careful tone. "Yes," Julian agreed, "but perhaps one that acknowledges what's already happening rather than creating something entirely new." Before she could respond, a crash from inside the house followed by Cassidy's exasperated "You guys," and the twins' matching giggles interrupted the moment. Julian laughed. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion after we assess the damage." "Perhaps we should," Marisol agreed, but she reached for his hand as they rose from the table, a small gesture that communicated more than words could have. Summer arrived with humid intensity, bringing with it milestones both planned and unexpected. Construction. On the Oak House began with a small ceremony where the twins and Cassidy, now officially placed with the Mercers through a long-term foster arrangement, took turns breaking ground with child-sized shovels. The Whitmores attended, their initial misgivings about the project having transformed into enthusiastic support, particularly after Eleanor discovered that several of her Boston social connections had children who might benefit from the center's services. As July heat settled over Charleston, the household expanded again, this time with the unexpected arrival of Marisol's younger sister, Lucia, who had received a scholarship to the College of Charleston. Her presence added another dimension to the evolving family structure, bringing Filipino traditions more prominently into the home and giving the twins yet another adult who adored them unconditionally. One evening, as fireflies blinked across the garden and humidity hung heavy in the air, Marisol found Julian sitting alone on the terrace, contemplating the partially constructed oak house visible beyond the property line. "The twins finally asleep?" he asked as she joined him. "After 3 stories and 2 glasses of water," she confirmed with a smile. "Cassidy's helping Lucia organize her college textbooks. I think she's more excited about Lucia's classes than Lucia is." "She's finding her path," Julian observed. "They all are." The simple statement encompassed so much. The twins' growing confidence, Cassidy's gradual unfurling from self-protection to tentative trust, and their own journey from employer and employee to partners in every sense. "I received an interesting letter today," Julian continued, retrieving an envelope from his pocket. "From Yale University." Marisol raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "They're hosting a symposium on innovative approaches to childhood trauma recovery. They've invited us, both of us, to speak about the Oak House model." Pride warmed Marisol's chest. "That's wonderful. Recognition. Even before we've officially opened." "It is," Julian agreed. "But what struck me most was how they addressed the letter." He handed it to her. "See for yourself." The formal letter was addressed to Julian Mercer and Marisol de la Cruz, co-founders, the Oak House Healing Center. The simple recognition of their equal standing in the project, her name alongside his without qualification or hierarchy, reflected how far they had come from their first meeting. "We've built something significant," Julian said softly. "Not just the center, but this family, this life." "We have," Marisol agreed. "From difficult beginnings." Julian reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a now familiar gesture. "I've been thinking about what you said months ago, about taking one step at a time. I believe we've taken quite a few steps now." "We have," Marisol acknowledged, her pulse quickening slightly. "Enough steps to consider a more permanent arrangement?" His voice held both certainty and question, not just as co-guardians or co-directors, but as partners in every sense. The proposal, for that was what it was despite its indirect phrasing, didn't surprise Marisol. They had been moving toward this moment for months, each step bringing them closer to acknowledging what had grown between them. A love built not on dramatic passion, but on shared purpose, mutual respect, and the daily choice to stay. "I think," she said carefully, "that would be the natural next step on the path we've been walking." Julian's smile reflected both relief and joy. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," Marisol confirmed, "but with one condition. Name it. We wait to tell the children until we're certain they're ready. They've experienced enough change to last a lifetime. This needs to strengthen their security, not challenge it." Julian nodded, his expression softening with understanding. "Always putting them first. It's one of the many reasons I love you." The declaration, simple and direct, hung in the humid evening air between them. It wasn't the first time he'd spoken the words, but each utterance still carried the weight of significance, of boundaries crossed and new territories claimed. "I love you too," Marisol replied, enough to stay through whatever comes next. Later that night, long after the household had settled into sleep, Marisol stood at her bedroom window. From there she could see both the grand oak tree that had witnessed their family's transformation and the emerging structure of the oak house beyond it, past and future, in a single gaze. Her journey had begun with a worn canvas bag and a temporary position. It had evolved into something no employment contract could have anticipated. A home, a purpose, a family created through choice rather than circumstance. As she turned back toward her bed, Her gaze fell on the small blue button that still sat on her nightstand, Carter's first gesture of trust, offered as she was leaving. She had kept it as a reminder of beginnings, of small brave acts that open doors to larger possibilities. Now it represented something more, the understanding that sometimes the most powerful choice isn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Sometimes it's simply about staying when everyone else walks away, about believing in the slow, steady work of rebuilding what's broken, about recognizing family in its many forms. In the morning, there would be breakfast to prepare and children to tend to. There would be construction meetings and curriculum planning. There would be the beautiful chaos of their blended, unconventional household finding its rhythm for another day. But for now, in the quiet darkness, Marisol de la Cruz, nanny turned guardian turned partner, simply savored the peace of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. In the Mercer estate, once cold and silent, now warm with life, under the watchful branches of the ancient oak, at the center of a family rebuilt through patience, understanding, and the courage to stay.